This workshop focuses on team communication and how to collaborate effectively as a team. This is sponsored by the Global Communication Center, which is a free tutoring resource for Carnegie Mellon students. We work with students on any written, oral, or visual communication project related to their academic life at Carnegie Mellon. This includes things like technical reports, theses, proposals, PowerPoint presentations, job application materials, scientific posters, and oral presentations. You can make an appointment with one of our tutors to work on any of these documents by going to our website right here and clicking on the Make an Appointment link, and that will take you directly to our scheduling server where you can see when there are tutors available. Today, I'm going to talk to you about team communication, and this is really exciting for me. This is based on almost a decade now of research that I have done studying student teams. Now, my very first project on this, I observed 17 different student teams in technical writing or engineering or computer science classes, and I noticed a lot of problems on these teams. And at the end of the projects, I interviewed each team member individually. And here are some examples of some of the interviews that I had. So here's one student I interviewed where I asked him, "Did anybody give you any input on the sections you wrote?" The student says, "No, no one gave each other opinions on their work." And I said, "Did you expect to?" And the student said, "Well, at the beginning, yes. But then everybody submitted at the last minute, so it was rushed. At this point, we were in finals. We weren't going to do anything else." So I'd like to know, how many of you have had a similar experience where you had good intentions at the beginning of the project, but everything ended up rushed and you really didn't have time to review each other's work? So this is typically about 80% or more of the audience raises their hand on this one. Here's another student who says, "Well, we originally assigned each person on the team a specific area, and when she got her teammates' work, she says, it was terrible. I couldn't believe it. My teammates didn't find any research that was engineering related. There was no quantitative data to back up what they were saying." She says it was really like an exercise in BS what they presented to me. So this is an example of a project where the student is very disappointed in the quality of work of her teammates. Typically, about at least 50% of students say that they've experienced this kind of problem. Here's one last one. The student said, "Personally, I thought we could have used our meeting time better. It took us 50 minutes to revise about half a page because of word choice or how we wanted to say it, and then the final deadline caught up to us." So this is an example of a team project that used very inefficient processes. Again, about 50% of students said that this was a problem they had experienced. Now, as part of this project, I also interviewed professional engineers. These were people who had a minimum of 5 years experience on the job. The majority had 15 or 20 years of experience. Much of those years of experience were managing teams. And here's some of the things that professionals had to say when I showed them some of the problems that students had encountered. So one engineer said, "Well, I think the solution to the first problem is just project management. You should have a very clear project plan laid out that says what every team member is going to do, has an early deadline so that you have time to integrate everybody's input into the final." Another engineer said, "Defining things up front can save a lot of problems up the road. If you can address some of the expectations ahead of time, then you save a lot of problems later on in the project." The more you do up front, the more you save later. Another engineer said, it's usually worth the time to document exactly what you're going to do. Off the cuff in business is not a good rule. You need to have a plan and then work the plan. And this was a common theme throughout the interviews, that students did not do enough planning, did not do enough documentation up front. So today what I'm going to teach you is what it means to have a plan and work that plan. And I'm going to go over some basic types of documents that are really essential to help keep a team on task. And then I'll also talk about the role of a project manager. Now, the number one thing that I'm going to emphasize here is to use a task schedule. When I first started interviewing professionals, I asked them, do you use a task schedule for your projects? They all said yes. I asked them, would you ever do a project that didn't have a task schedule? They laughed at me. I stopped asking these questions because I wasn't getting very interesting answers. And most of the time when professionals saw some of the problems students were having, they were like, why did they even get to this point? This should have all been cleared up, taken care of when they were hammering out the task schedule. So, what is a task schedule? Basically, a task schedule is a list of who does what when. It can be a very informal document with dates, names, and tasks. When you have a task schedule, the first step is to break the project down into concrete steps. Figure out what needs to be done. This is really important because a lot of times you might find out that your idea of what needs to happen is different from somebody else's idea of what needs to happen. You want to have that conversation before anybody has invested any work into the project. The sooner you can address those competing views of what needs to happen, the better off it is for the team. Next, you assign tasks to individuals and list deadlines. Now, humor me for a second here. Take a look at this task schedule right here, and I want you to identify what's wrong with this. This is a task schedule that a student team did turn in. You will probably notice that it does not have any names on it. So what's going to happen with this? Probably these things aren't going to get done if you don't assign names to them. So when you create the task schedule, well, first of all, you want to think about different ways to collaborate. And there are three main ways that you can collaborate. The first is face-to-face collaboration. This is where everybody meets together. You have a team meeting. This is very effective for brainstorming, for meeting to discuss changes that you want to make. Face-to-face meetings are great for getting a lot of ideas on the table and making a decision about them. Face-to-face is a very poor method, however, for getting a lot of work done. It is basically impossible to have 3 or more people around a computer and have everybody have equal input. It tends to be a very inefficient way to try to complete a task. Now, divided collaboration is one that often students use. In this case, let's say we have a 9-page report due. So we might say Tim takes the first 3 pages, Stephen takes the next, and Charlotte takes the last 3 pages. And then we meet at the end and squish them all together. And these kind of projects look exactly like 3 different people wrote 3 different sections and squished them all together. I call these Frankenstein projects because they don't really match, they don't really go together. There's a lot of inconsistencies. This is not really collaboration. Instead, and this is what the task schedule will help you do, you want to think about layering the tasks so that for every main component of the project, everybody on the team touches that, looks at that, provides their input. And it's a really good idea to have each person on the team be responsible for a different skill set or a different perspective. So you might have one person who's the data expert, another person who is responsible for, is the client expert. But have everybody have a different kind of expertise, and then build on each other's projects based on that. A layered task schedule should have early deadlines and built-in review points. And if you look at the handout that accompanies this presentation, you'll see example of review points. You need to build in places where people are going to look at each other's work and provide feedback. So here we have on the 21st, Charlotte's going to email her draft out, then Tim is going to email comments, and Stephen is going to take Charlotte's draft and Tim's comments and revise that and add his own perspective onto this. You need to build in these review points from the beginning of the project. And this is really important because it gives, it says at the beginning, you're agreeing to provide feedback on each other's work. Otherwise, if you don't build that in at the beginning, then you might see something that your teammates do, and it's maybe not up to as high quality as you would like, but you feel a little bit awkward, a little bit like, oh, if I tell them to fix this, will they see me as a jerk? Doing the task schedule takes care of all of that because you have said on day one that you are going to provide that feedback. If you don't do it, then you are letting the team down. That is your job, and this person knows to expect that feedback. Now, when you are giving each other feedback, you want to think about how you're going to do it. Basically, there's two different ways to revise somebody's work. You can do it directly, so you can take somebody's contribution and go ahead and just change it directly. Usually turning on something like track changes so that you can see all the additions you've made, all the deletions you've made, and the original author can then go through and accept and reject this. Direct revision tends to be very good for quickly making some revisions to someone's work. The downside of it is it's hard for multiple people to give feedback without accidentally writing over each other's work. The alternative method is to use something like comments or just provide feedback, and that all goes back to the original author who then revises. Or it could go back to another author who takes somebody else who takes on the next step of the project. So these are two methods for doing it. This one has the advantage that multiple people can give feedback, and it's also very good for things that require a lot of global changes. Both methods of feedback, direct revision and feedback in the form of comments, are good, but you should talk first about which one you're going to use so it isn't a surprise to people. On the handout that accompanies this presentation, I've given you a quick checklist for revising a group document because a lot of what you will be producing when you do a team project is some kind of document. Always be sure to begin by rereading the project requirements and goals, and as much as possible, try to base any of your suggestions in the actual project criteria, the project requirements. Be sure to praise your teammates. Everybody likes to know what they did well as what they need to improve. Even if all you can say is, thank you for getting this in on time, say something positive as well as critiques. Then you can make suggestions for additional material, or if you're using direct revision, you can just go ahead and add that. You should look for anything that's inaccurate or misleading, and you should go ahead and make changes to the argument or the organization. So that was the task schedule, and that is absolutely, if there's one thing you take away from this presentation, it should be to use a task schedule and to build in those points where the teammates are going to be reviewing one another's work. Let me tell you a horror story about one of the student teams that I observed. One of the teammates on this project he plagiarized his section of the report. As a writing teacher, I knew this immediately. I was like, there is no way this kid learned this much about irrigation in this short a time. When I interviewed each member of the team, and I interviewed them individually after the project had been turned in, I showed them the students' part of the project, what had been turned in, and I showed them the website that it had basically been copied and pasted from. And I asked each student, what do you think about this? Do you notice these similarities? And the students said, oh my gosh, he just cut and pasted. And I said, why didn't you catch this? Why didn't you notice this? And except for one person, they all said, I didn't read his part. You don't want to be in this situation. Now, hopefully that's an extreme example, but you can imagine all sorts of lesser examples where these projects are going to be going in with your name on them. You want to review it and make sure that things are up to the quality, something that you can feel that you can have your name on. And you need to give each other feedback on each other's work. The task schedule is what will make sure that you have budgeted enough time for this. Now, another document that I emphasize is a team charter. Team charter is a useful document for a longer project. If you have a very short project, a project that is, say, 10 days or so, I would not bother to do a team charter. But for something that's more like 6 weeks, a semester, a year, a charter is a very good document. A team charter, and this is on the handout, defines goals and expectations up front. So team charter should start off by defining the broad team goals. What does the team think that it means to be successful on this project? How are you defining success? It is also useful to have personal goals on here. What does each person on the team want to get out of this project? Find that out up front. See if there are ways to make things happen. I also recommend that up front you say what kind of commitments team members have. I give an option for people who are not willing, who might be willing to do less work and would be willing to get a lower grade. So if there are people on the project who are like, honestly, I would be satisfied with the B, you want to know that up front. And you can go ahead and assign them less work up front and just have an agreement that when your instructor has a final project evaluation, that you will go ahead and note that they did 80% of the work of other people. This helps prevent surprises that come up later. It's very similar to a workplace type situation where you would have different people on the project who have different levels of commitment, different levels of investment on a project. So for instance, when I used to be a computer programmer on various projects, some projects I would be 100% dedicated to that project. That was what I was doing. On other projects, I'd be 20 or 30% of my time would be dedicated to that project. So you want to know these things up front. You should also find out if there are, if someone has a particularly busy week. There's a week when someone on the team has 3 tests. If you know that up front, you can design the task schedule so you don't give that person any work that week. They can either do it the week before or make it up afterwards. So you want to find out all of these things up front. You want to find out as much of what people think is successful, what they want to get out of the project, what kinds of constraints or commitments. The time you invest finding out that information up front is time that you save later on in the project. You can also use the team charter to identify how the team is going to resolve conflicts. So you can decide, are you going to talk till you get consensus? Are you going to vote? If it's a project that has a client, well, you talk, and then if you can't make a resolution, you might go to the client and say, which one of these solutions do you like better? These are all good methods. Go ahead and pick a method that you agree to before you have any conflicts. Now, another important document to help build a good team infrastructure is to document any meetings that you have. And this is really important. The CEO of Intel basically says that if a meeting is worth calling, then producing the minutes is just a small additional effort necessary to realize the full benefits of that meeting. In other words, if you don't have time to produce the minutes, then maybe you didn't have time to have the meeting. Another person we interviewed said you could say one thing to 5 different people and you'll get 5 different interpretations. And the more that you are working in a cross-cultural team, the more likely this is. And the more you're working in a distributed team, where maybe you're doing a lot of the meetings through Skype or some kind of electronic type of meeting system. The more distributed or cross-cultural you are, the more the opportunity for misunderstanding occurs. The minutes are a good way to make sure that everybody can agree on what was decided. And as another engineer we interviewed said, even if you don't produce formal minutes, at the end of the meeting there should be a page, just a list that says, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. The meetings are important to make sure that you don't end up repeating the same thing at every meeting, that you actually follow through on what you decided on. And most importantly, if somebody volunteers for something, you want to write that down in the minutes so that that person doesn't forget. Now, we found when we first started requiring student teams to do minutes that there was some confusion over what good minutes look like. In the handout accompanying this presentation, there are 3 different versions of meeting minutes, version 1, version 2, and version 3. Go ahead and take a second and pause this video and decide which version you like the best. Now, when I do this presentation live, I ask for a show of hands. And I ask people for version 1, how many like it. Nobody ever raises their hands for this. For version 2, about 90% of people raise their hands, and I get a few people who like version 3. So let's go through these in order. Version 1, nobody likes because it's disorganized. It follows the meeting chronologically. It's very hard to pick out what the main takeaways are. Basically, this goes through and records everything that happened in the meeting. And my reaction, I've actually been in a meeting where someone produced minutes that look like this. And my reaction was like, oh my God, that meeting was horrible enough the first time. Why do you want to relive it again? This is basically what these minutes are doing. Version 2, most people prefer, immediately because it's really easy to pick out the action items. It is easy for someone to look for their name and say, here's what I need to do. It's a very quick documentation of the decisions that were made and the rationale and some detail supporting those decisions. The only objection to this one is that it might take longer than some of the other versions to produce. And my response to that is there might be times where you don't want to go into all the detail of this part, but at the very minimum, you should have a list like this of what everybody is going to do. There are some people who I've been collaborating with for years. We work very well together. We know each other, and there's a lot of trust there. Even then, when we have a meeting, I will still produce this kind of list, if for no other reason than for myself, so that I remember what it is I said I was going to do. Now, version 3 is nice in that it's succinct. It has some detail about what happened in the meeting. And version 3 is a kind of minutes that I call parliamentary minutes. This is a documentation of what exactly happened in the meeting and who said what. And this is very important if you are trying to produce minutes for a public meeting, such as a meeting where there are politicians present. Because if you have a senator at your meeting, the senator wants it documented that he or she spoke. Now, internally, for your own purposes, for your own project team, it doesn't really matter who said what. It doesn't matter who came up with the idea. All that matters is what the team decided on. In fact, if it's a really good team and a good meeting, you won't even know whose idea it was. Version 3 documents the past. The focus is on what happened. Version 2, the focus is on the future. The focus is on what needs to happen next. And this is why version 2 is a better version for a project team, because it governs the future, not just documents the past. And this is a very important point. And in fact, students often are under the misconception that meeting minutes would be produced by a secretary or an administrative assistant on the team. And that is not the case. The administrative person doesn't have enough knowledge to produce the minutes. The minutes are usually produced by the project manager or the project lead, the person who is most invested in the success of the project, the person who is most invested in getting things done and seeing things forward. That is the person who produces the minutes, because this is a managerial document, not just an administrative or busy work type document. And as I said before, at the very least, you should have this list of who is going to do what. Now this brings me to my last spread point, that you want a project manager on your team. This for most projects will not be the project manager's only role on the team. The project manager will do other work. But you want someone on the team who the team gives authority to enforce the team's decisions. And the project manager will be the person who produces these managerial documents. The project manager will be the person who maintains the task schedule. The project manager will be the person who, if someone misses a deadline, the project manager is the person who will email them and say, hey, you missed this deadline. You need to get this in as soon as possible. The project manager circulates the meeting minutes, provides a meeting and an agenda. And a meeting agenda is just a quick bulleted list of what needs to happen in the meeting. Maybe a few items that you send through email in advance. The project manager would also be the person who might go to the instructor if the team is having problems. Now this leads up to an important point. What do you do if somebody is on the task schedule and they miss their deadline? You should decide up front in the team charter how the team is going to handle someone who misses a deadline. A really good solution is that the project manager will email that person and give them 24 hours to turn it in, at which point they get, if still not in, they get a stronger warning, and maybe the project manager at that point goes to the instructor and says, just want to let you know that we are having this problem. If it goes on for a certain amount of time, say 72 hours, and you still haven't heard from the person, it might be a good point to cut that person out of the project because you can't depend on them for that work. But the project manager needs to be the person who's going to enforce that team decision or say, okay, team, we need to have this conversation, what we're going to do about this person. Otherwise, if you don't assign that to one individual on the team up front, then what do you do when someone doesn't turn it in? Are you going to be the one who steps up? That's kind of like, well, why you? Why are you suddenly acting like boss? It becomes socially awkward. The whole point of this documentation of a task schedule, of having minutes of a project manager, is to depersonalize the process as much as possible. You want to rely on the infrastructure, on the documentation, and on the process that you all agreed on, so that you don't have to troubleshoot awkward situations. Now, that said, what I have talked about so far will take care of about 50 to 70% of team problems. The task schedule alone, in and of itself, once I started requiring my student teams to use a task schedule, about half of the problems immediately go away because things get done in an orderly manner. People know that there is documentation, that they are accountable for doing things at a certain time, and so they're much more likely to do it. If the team runs into trouble with a task schedule, I can do something as an instructor. If the team doesn't produce a task schedule and someone comes to me and says, oh, Stephen was supposed to do this by Friday, and now it's Tuesday and he hasn't done it. If I don't have a task schedule, there's not a lot I can do about that. The task schedule is the documentation that holds people accountable. It gives the team some leverage to enforce the team's decisions. Now, I said this will take care, all of these things will take care of 50 to 70%. There still, of course, will be some problems, but this will get the majority of them. Now I want to show you a couple videos. So this video is about 3 minutes long. I want you to watch it. Think about, is this a well-functioning team, a poorly functioning team? What could be done to improve this team's process? Let's go ahead and play right here.
So, now what do we do?
Well, have we started the survey?
It's already done.
Oh, okay, good. Well, how did it go?
I actually have the results.
Can I see it? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and take a look.
Okay.
As you can see, from the data we collected, there's really not much that can be gathered from it. Everyone does it in the same fashion.
Okay, well.
But Ben gave me 11 and I had 15.
Well, maybe we could change some of these questions. Well, when does it even do?
The thing is, I already turned it in.
Oh, okay.
But, you know, we've got the questions phrased.
Uh-huh.
We've got all the data, the numerical scores. If you need anything for evidence to back up the hard figures, I can get that to you. Just let me know.
Oh, okay. Well, I was wondering, can I have a copy of this?
Yeah, you can just go ahead and keep that one.
I can keep this one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, Ben, do you have a copy of this? Well, do you have an extra copy with you?
I don't have one with me. I can make a copy one for him later.
So you're going to make a copy for him and he can have one?
Sure thing.
Okay, well, thanks. That'd be good, I think. I was thinking that we should do a slide for each source that we had, like, 2 slides for me and 2 slides for you and 2 slides for you. I was thinking maybe that would be a good idea.
Maybe we should have a handout or something.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. She said that we should have a handout. And I was thinking, do you think that you could do the handout since he's doing all that PowerPoint stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, that'd be good. That would probably pull things together. If you could just look over this, if you could, if there's any changes and, if I missed something.
All right.
If there is, I can print out 5 more copies, but, it doesn't really matter. And, if it's something little, I can just white out over it and just, write it in.
All right.
So, I usually ask students what they think of it. And most students point out some problems with this team. You should be really kind of concerned about how this team is functioning. So, they have done a survey, which this team member wanted some input on, but the survey has already been completed. So, and it had bad results. So this is something where clearly the team is not using its full potential because we have someone who wants to give input who hasn't had an opportunity. We also saw later on when they were dividing things up with the PowerPoint presentation, they were kind of doing stuff off the cuff, not really with much of a plan there. They have one person who's going to be doing the PowerPoint and somebody else who's going to be doing the handout. And what's the problem with that? As you can probably figure out, if that's all the planning that they're doing, the PowerPoint and the handout might not match up very well. They need to budget some time in here for the two of them to share each other's work and make sure that they're on the same page. Otherwise, what's going to happen is they will show up for the presentation and they'll realize while they're giving it that things don't quite coordinate. As a matter of fact, when we have interviewed students about problems that they've experienced on teams, we have heard many, many stories of students who are standing at the presentation, listening to what their teammates saying, and are like, oh my God, I want to die. This is not what we need to be doing. This is totally off base. But of course, it's the presentation. What are you going to do? It's too late. So they didn't budget time for collaboration. Also, you would notice at the very end, Shelley is giving her teammates a document. It's actually a 30-page document that she's printed off 5 copies of, and it's asking them for their feedback. Obviously, you should ask people for their feedback before you've printed things out. While it's still electronic, it makes it very hard. Actually, the other teammates did have feedback they wanted to give her, things they wanted to change, but they were like, yeah, we don't want her to have to print off all those copies again. So this is a team that really isn't collaborating, is not using each other to produce a higher quality project than they could by any one of them doing it themselves. What this team really needs is a task schedule that builds in some review points so that people know what's going on, so that we're making good use of everybody, because as a lot of students point out, Ben over here does not seem to be fully contributing. And so this all needs to be planned out up front. So let me show you another video here. So again, this is a very short video. I want you to watch it, think about what is not working as well as it should in this team, and what should be done to improve this team's process.
I think we said it's all right in this section.
Are you? Don't worry about the little things. Just
at this point, instead of going through all them,
just put it right there.
Yeah, instead of going through revising,
rewording everything.
Yeah, we'll write everything and then revise.
Okay, right.
The thing is, you already have it written. You're just redoing it now.
Yeah, we have it written. We're starting with the letter of recommendations, that kind of stuff. Well, it's not all there.
Typo there. Right. Up. There. All we have to do is just fit what they're trying to say, and then we'll move on to the next thing.
How about we compare?
Just most schools list this as number 2.
What's the reference for this?
UK, U of L. I'll list this as our number 2. It should be physics.
That's number 6.
Well, they don't divide it like that, but whatever, they're all covered.
Well, why don't you just say the ZAT and the MCAT consist of these things? And then at the bottom say that they differ in the individual perceptions of physics.
That's what we're saying.
Oh, okay.
The DAT and the MCAT, that's covered. They both contain, you can say they now. They both consist of, I don't think the number of the sections is important. They both consist of
the following sections.
Similar sections.
No, the sections, the following sections, whatever. That'll work.
Now, when I show this to student classes, students are typically quick to point out that this is a team where not everybody is having equal input. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of competition over who gets to speak. This is a really clear illustration of what I said earlier, that it's virtually impossible to have 3 people around a computer and have everybody have equal input. This is actually a very inefficient process here, and Natalie clearly is not contributing as much as she could be. It also doesn't seem the best way to do things to constantly be critiquing every single word that's going on here. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that the video you saw is a reenactment, but it's a reenactment of a video I collected from a real student team. And in this real student team, Natalie was actually quite upset with her team. And as a matter of fact, at the end of the class period, she started tearing up because she was so frustrated with her teammates. Now, this is something, there's 2 sides to this problem. First of all, if there's someone on your team who is not contributing as much, you really need to take it on as part of your responsibility to make sure that they're included, to really kind of be on a watch out for people who might be silenced, who might want to have more input but are having difficulty. Again, if you are working on a cross-cultural team, this becomes particularly important if you have people who have very different communication styles, very different senses of what is polite, what is appropriate, or who might feel not as central to the team. It's very important that you, for instance, if you're Mark or Keith, turn around in your chair, make eye contact with the other person, and invite them in. Now, let's say the other 2 people don't do this. We have a situation where Natalie is upset. She's starting to tear up. Now, this team should have, from the beginning, used a task schedule. They are not efficiently dividing up the work. They're not making full input of all of the teammates. That's what should have happened. It didn't happen. At this point, somebody needs to speak up. Natalie is upset. She needs to speak up. But that can be, again, socially difficult to do. So I want to talk, and on the last page of the handout that accompanies this presentation, I have a little script, some things to keep in mind when you need to address a problem. So first, when you have a problem that needs to address, you want to make sure that you are being non-emotional, not confronting it from an emotional perspective. You want to avoid saying something like, you guys are excluding me, or you all need to listen. That is not going to be effective. People typically don't respond well to having their behavior corrected. So take a deep breath. Try to avoid that kind of more attacking type way of handling the problem. What you do want to do is remind the team of shared goals or criteria that are not being met. So examples of shared goals that you can bring up to a team are the project requirements, the assignment sheet. These are things that everybody shares. You can bring up efficiency. We want to use our time efficiently. You can bring up quality. We want to have a high quality project, the best quality project that we can have. You can bring up, we want to all have a good learning experience, because that's really important. That's why you're here on these team projects. You can also bring up, we want to make sure that we're distributing the workload equally. We're distributing the workload fairly so that nobody is getting overburdened and so that we're making good use of all of our resources. So bring up something that everybody should agree to. Another thing is we want to make sure that we meet the deadline is another important one. Then you want to say, or you can do this first, say what is going well in addition to pointing out what needs to improve. Say something like, you guys are really motivated. You guys really seem to know what you're doing. This idea you pointed out is it has these good things about it, but it's overlooking something else. But people react well if you can say something that reinforces what they're doing well. It makes them less defensive, more likely to listen. And then propose some kind of procedural change that will move the team forward. And some examples of procedures that help move the team forward are making changes to the task schedule. You could add layers to the task schedule, additional points, additional places for review. If someone is continually late turning things in or is turning in poor quality work, you can break their tasks down into smaller chunks and earlier deadlines. You can reassign roles on the task schedule. You can use formal brainstorming. What formal brainstorming is you go around to each person on the team and have them contribute ideas, and then that person cannot speak again until you have heard from every person on the team. You can do a systematic pro-con evaluation of all the alternatives. So say there's 3 different ways to proceed. You list them on a whiteboard and you go through all the pros and cons. Nobody's allowed to knock down an idea, but you generate the ideas, get as much as possible, and then you make a decision. You can also seek outside input. These are all procedural things. They are very logical. They make a lot of sense. They move things from the personal to the procedural and make it less personal. So, what could Natalie say to Mark and Keith? She could say something like, the quality of what we have done so far is good, but we need a more efficient procedure or we're going to run out of time. So this is saying something that they did well, but also pointing out a shared goal. We want an efficient procedure, and we want to make sure we do it on time. Then she could also say, I want to make sure I am making a full contribution to the project. That again is a shared goal. Of course, we want everybody to make a full contribution. Then, if it's okay, I'd like to bring a draft task schedule to our next meeting so we can make sure we are using our time efficiently and we're all making equal contributions. So she's suggesting a specific procedure here that can help move the team forward. Here's another scenario. This was one of the ones that was at the very beginning of the presentation. So this student is complaining that each person on the team was given a specific area and she gets her teammates' work and it's terrible. They didn't include any research that was engineering related. There was no quantitative data to back up what they were saying. They just filled out 2 pages, all qualitative. So, what is a good way for this student to address her teammates, to fix this problem? The first thing, I want to think about what's a shared goal or criteria that she could name that could help her teammates. What could she point out that's going right? And what would be a specific solution with some clear procedures? Go ahead and take a minute and jot down what you might say. So here's one possible response. She could say, you guys have found some good qualitative material, but the guidelines say we need some quantitative data, specifically data on tension and force. So here she's pointing out what they did well. They got some good qualitative stuff, and she's referring to the assignment guidelines, which is really strong. This is something that they share. It's impersonal. It's something that they would all have to agree on. Then she could say, I could show you a website where I found this information. Then, after we all give each other feedback, why don't we revise our parts and meet again in a couple days to review our work again? So that's a specific procedure. Let's go ahead, find some data. We all give each other feedback, but let's plan right now on meeting again in a couple days. And this is why having a task schedule with early deadlines is so important, so that you can do these kinds of things, so you aren't reliant on on the first draft that your teammates produce, because it's very easy for people to miss something, to forget something, or they just didn't understand, because you're all students. And these people might be very good teammates who, once you point this out, will immediately fix it and do a much better job than you imagined. What you don't want to do in this situation is take their work and say, oh, thanks, guys, and then go change it all on them. We have interviewed several students who have had that happen to them. We've interviewed some other students who have done that. And they all agree that this was the wrong thing to do, because, first of all, it's more work for the person who makes those changes. But secondly, the person who originally wrote it and who has their work completely revised is usually very upset. They're kind of like, what? This person didn't even respect me enough to tell me that there was something that needed to change. They feel you're denying them a chance to learn. And that's part of the goal of a group project. This will be my last point. Remember, when you're on a team project, that you are here to learn. Your job, your goal here should be to make this a good learning experience for yourself. So I'm going to end here, but thank you very much for listening to this.